This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have breaking news right now that relates to the Epstein case, and that is that Donald Trump and the DOJ have decided to fire Maureen Comey, who is one of the prosecutors involved in the Epstein case. So first and foremost, what are the implications of this?
Okay, so if you want to know who would know what was in the contents of the Epstein file, the lawyer who prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein would know what's in the Epstein files, right? Like,
Yeah.
There's probably, a handful of people who are the most intimate with the records and the record and the files and the who said what and who did what. And on that short list of the most knowledgeable would be the prosecutors who handled this case. And she is, according to reporting, was one of those prosecutors, was a senior prosecutor as part of that team. And she has now been fired. She has been fired now in the midst of Donald Trump saying that there are files, right after originally saying they're not,
Right.
admitting that they're acknowledging there are files, and now trying to claim that those files were put together by Democrats, by Barack Obama, by Joe Biden, by James Comey, by John Brennan, by Hillary Clinton. Like name your soup of addled brain Donald Trump names of Democrats. None of that makes any sense. None of that timing works, right? I mean, Epstein was prosecuted under Donald Trump's Department of Justice. He committed suicide or died in custody under Donald Trump's Department of Justice. And so when you are trying to identify who knows about what's in these files, you'd start with those prosecutors. Now, obviously, Pam Bondi has dispatched other people to go back and review the files, but this is a blockbuster development. I mean, this is akin to the Saturday Night Massacre in the Nixon administration when he fired the special counsel. Obviously, this is not a special counsel, but literally he is firing the prosecutor who would know, if not the most, would be in the handful of people who would know the most about what's in the Epstein files.
Mark, this seems a little bit counterintuitive to me because presumably, while she's a DOJ prosecutor, she would have to listen to whatever Pam Bondi or Donald Trump told her to do, and so she wouldn't be able to speak out of turn. Does this not just free her up to kind of be able to speak freely in the media about what she may or may not know now that she's no longer employed by the federal government?
Look, there is a critical fact that we don't know, okay? And I think we need to acknowledge to the audience, you don't know it, I don't know it. But, it is something you and I have talked about in other videos. We've talked about privately, off air. I've written about this for Democracy Docket. Something happens at the end of last week that causes Donald Trump to no longer believe he can maintain complete control over these records, okay? Like something happens that he goes from, there are no Epstein files, which is what Pam Bondi basically said. She basically said there was nothing more to release. And Donald Trump on Saturday night at about 5:30 p.m. pivots away from that, away from there is nothing more to release or there's nothing important to release, to this new position that he's been in ever since, which is that what there would be released would not be accurate. It would be written by Democrats and it is not to be believed. And I have to think that whatever it is that triggered it, it changed the calculation in his head from containment to discrediting. So you're asking a question like, but why wouldn't he want to contain? Like, why wouldn't he want people inside the tent, right? Why would he? And what I'm saying to you is that this is just the latest example of what appears to be a systematic change in which Trump is sort of preparing for something to be released, and he wants to be in the position of discrediting the people who are the records that come forward. And so from his standpoint, and his supporters' standpoint, having fired a prosecutor gives him the ability to say, well, this is a disgruntled person. This was someone we fired, right? This is like, you know what I mean? And so, and I don't know what it is that's caused this shift. I mean, maybe it's nothing. Maybe he just like a different synapse fired while he was spray tanning himself.
Yeah.
But that is, I think, the most logical answer.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And it does seem like he's given up on this idea. I think he's come to terms with the fact that information, one way or the other, is going to come out. And so he's pivoted from trying to prevent it from coming out, saying that the files are non-existent, because he took so much flack for that. I mean, it was so widely panned from left and right that him saying that they're not there was not a tenable position. And so now he's gone all in on laying the groundwork to pretend that this is some concoction of the communist Marxist Democrats. What he's looking to do is basically to sort this into the same partisan bucket that any other, the Russia hoax, or the 51, whatever, like all of his conspiracy theories. He wants this to become that. And so he's given up on trying to say that the Epstein files are not real. He knows they're going to come out. Now it's just a matter of discrediting them so fully that they just seem like some democratic creation. But it's worth asking, going back to the question I asked before, does Maureen Comey have the ability to speak freely now that she's no longer at the DOJ?
I mean, she has more freedom to speak freely, but she still has professional ethical obligations. She still has grand jury secrecy obligations. So I don't think this is going to be a game changer, in the sense that I don't believe she is going to, spill facts and information that is under seal or otherwise protected. But we've seen other instances, including, by the way, other prosecutors from this very office, from the Southern District of New York. Remember, this is the office that Emil Bovee and Pam Bondi tried to pressure to drop the charges,
right,
drop the indictment against Eric Adams, that caused several resignations of the acting U.S. attorney and other figures in that office, because they felt like they were being pressured to do something that is unethical. And that led those prosecutors to then write public letters. So the point I'm making is that they were able to be more free, right? Danielle Sassoon was able to be more free, and in fact identified the fact that Emil Bovee had instructed that her staff not take notes, for example, or destroy their notes that they had taken, and that there had been a quid pro quo offered, in her view, by Eric Adams's lawyers. Those are the kind of facts that, if she had stayed on the payroll, obviously she would not have been able to disclose. That came out as a part of her resignation. So, we don't know how free this former prosecutor now will feel to be able to speak. But I think that from the Trump administration standpoint, they are giving themselves a plausible villain, a plausible argument that this person has bias for whatever theory they need to spin next. Now, I think that one of the ways that this story needs to be advanced, and not that I count on the legacy media to do much, but maybe they'll be up for this, is who fired Ms. Comey? Yeah. Was it the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, which again has been we've seen a lot of resignations around that office over being pressured to do things. Was it Blanche or Bovee or some other intermediate? Was it Pam Bondi? You and I assume that Pam Bondi doesn't get a Diet Coke from the fridge without checking with Donald Trump, right, but we don't know where it is. And I think that will be a critical set of facts to be uncovered, because certainly you would not expect that a line assistant in the U.S. attorneys in the Southern District of New York would garner the attention of anyone outside of their immediate supervisor in the Southern District of New York. So we haven't heard the reason for this. Like, was there a reason given for the termination, and where in this chain did this originate? Because I think that will also tell us a lot about whether how this connects up to the Epstein matter.
It's also worth asking here, is it possible that good prosecutors, ethical prosecutors who worked on this Epstein case are being pushed out so that they can be replaced by unethical prosecutors who may be handpicked by Donald Trump, who may be willing to offer up a narrative that more closely aligns to the narrative that Trump is trying to push here?
Yeah, that's also, by the way, I'm glad you raised that, because I had not thought about that, but that is also a plausible theory here. And of course, that would more closely hew to the Eric Adams case. Like, remember, what happened in the Eric Adams case is the Southern District of New York had indicted the former mayor or I'm sorry, the current mayor, not the former mayor, had indicted the mayor. And the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, and the higher ups pressured the Southern District to drop the prosecution. And essentially, the good prosecutors, the ethical prosecutors, said, we can't do that. We have to resign. And ultimately, one of them wrote a resignation letter saying, you will find a fool or a coward to do this. It was never going to be me.
Yeah.
And so there is some reason to believe that this Department of Justice thinks that if it has a recalcitrant prosecutor that is refusing to do something that they believe unethical, that they can push them out and replace them with someone who will be more pliable.
Right. And I mean, we've, again, to your exact point, we have seen that happen before. And it looks like this administration is it looks like Donald Trump himself is in such dire straits here, is so desperate to reclaim ownership of the narrative that I wouldn't be surprised if he was finding people that he could put in place now so that if and when some damaging information comes out, notwithstanding what people like Maureen Comey might say on the outside, but he'll have the full power of a very compliant DOJ behind him backing up whatever it is that he claims.
Right. And I think that, you said something here that, relates to this a little bit to the side, but I think is really important. I don't think I've heard anyone say. You mentioned like Donald Trump and his administration. This really feels very much like Donald Trump alone. JD Vance, as you recall, told Theo Von that these files have to come off. We have not, and we have seen the vice president come out and defend Donald Trump's positions on things where Donald Trump needed to be defended. For example, he took on the MAGA base over the bombing in Iran, right?
Yeah.
Like you saw him step forward, and he has been a loyal soldier on that. I don't think we've heard from him. I don't think we've heard from JD Vance. I don't think we've heard from Stephen Miller. I don't think we've heard from a lot of the voices from the administration.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Bongino, I don't even know if he's come back to work yet. You know what I mean?
That's right. And so the question is Donald Trump sort of like, walking the proverbial halls, talking to the paintings, where he is making these decisions alone, or is there some infrastructure around him? It doesn't appear that the usual infrastructure, which in his world is external, he picks up the phone, he calls this right-wing podcaster, that right-wing activist, Laura Loomer, whatever. Like, it doesn't feel like that world is with him. And so, one wonders what is the decision-making structure around him.
And by the way, just as it relates to Maureen Comey, is this, if they're not releasing any information as to why she was fired, I mean, does she have grounds to be able to fight this? I know that I presume that prosecutors here have to be fired for a cause. I don't want to get mired too much in the legal intricacies of this thing because it doesn't really matter here, but I'm just curious as it relates to her, what her next steps are and what her rights are.
Yeah, look, I think she's been told something. Okay. Like, she's been told a reason, like, whether she was terminated appropriately or inappropriately, I am very confident it is going to come out in the short term, the near term, rather than the long term, what the grounds are for firing. I mean, this is a very tight knit office. Some of the early reports suggest that she had a lot of friends and private displays of support among her colleagues.
Yeah.
It is not going to stay private. The reason that was given, whether that reason was pretextual or that reason was genuine, like, that's going to come out. And so what she does with that, I think, is an open question. Frankly, I was very surprised. I assume you were surprised that we saw some pretty conservative law and order prosecutors very publicly explain their separation from that office with regard to the Eric Adams matter. We have more recently seen a whistleblower from Maine Justice who's provided evidence in the Bovee confirmation process be pretty loud about like the circumstances. So these federal prosecutors tend not to be shrinking violets, particularly in that office. So I would be very surprised if we don't learn in the coming days what the rationale for her departure was. And to the extent it is laid at the feet of individuals in that office, I think there's going to be, that I think is going to more likely than not come out. We're going to know what the reason was and what the level of decision maker was.
Well, look, I think two things are clear. One is that we are not at the end of the story. We're very much at the beginning, and there's still a lot to come. Another point that I want to make is that you bring a much different perspective on this issue than I think most people who are speaking about it, because you're able to come at this from a legal perspective, and you've been very focused on this issue. So for everybody who's watching, if you want to get more analysis on this from somebody like Marc, who's able to speak on this stuff from a different perspective, please make sure to sign up, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It does not cost anything to subscribe, but it's a great way to support him and his team. Again, the link is right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.